we go. For those of you out there who continually have pushed Donald Trump, have messaged me literally by the thousands out of all the subscribers I have, and I guess people who stumble upon my channel and unsubscribe because of the fact that me, along with many people out there who get what's going on, talked about how this wasn't an election, it was a selection, how Trump was one of them. At this point in time, you can no longer push that argument. We all sat back, we gave it a chance. I heard the argument that God chose Donald Trump, but unfortunately, people are still gonna buy into this. You know why? Because Christians are still being duped because they do not understand what's going on in Israel. That's why the channels who are pro-Zionism, pro-Israel, when you listen to them talk, they're some of the stupidest people you'll ever hear in your life. Ever. They don't get it. Israel is what this is all about. And Trump and the US, just like under Obama, just like under all our presidents, they're all working with Israel, for the New World Order. Rothschild Israel. Not God's Israel from the Bible. Rothschild Israel. So no more of this, oh, well, Trump's not one of them. Well, he just showed you who he now is in alliance with. He just showed you, okay? What do you think the chemical attacks, the false flag chemical attacks that went on were staged to set this up? But even if it, some people debate if they're real bodies, if it was a hoax or not, even if it wasn't, who do you think was really behind it? Who is the enemy of Syria? It's Israel. All of this revolves around Israel, okay? And you know who controls and runs Israel? The Rothschilds do. Rothschild himself recently in an interview even admitted to it. He even said that the Rothschild family paved the way for the creation of Israel. You know why? Because they're the ones who engineered World War I. They're the ones who were behind it. And they promised the British government that they could convince the US to enter the war and ensure Britain's victory over Germany on the basis that the British government handed control of Palestine to the Zionists. Okay? That's what's going on here. That is what has happened. So they engineered World War I. The Rothschild family, the Zionists, before there was Zionism, the fake Jews, they're the ones who got us into World War I, who were behind it. And guess what? Guess what the bombing, quote unquote, or whatever, the missile launch yesterday was? It was the anniversary of that day that America entered World War I, April 6th, 1917. As we all know, these people operate by specific dates, right? By numerology. That's a fact. So you think it was a coincidence that this happened yesterday? Exactly 100 years from the date that America entered World War I? Of course it's not. And you know why? Because the Rothschilds are in on it. They need Syria. Syria is one of the only countries that they don't have control of. You look at Iran, you look at Syria, there's no globalist bank set up there. That's what this is about. This is about global banking. This is about the control of all currency. Syria's central bank is state-owned and controlled. You know what else? Syria doesn't have International Monetary Fund debt. There's no IMF debt. They want you in debt. That's part of the reason that they want control of all the banks around the world. Because when you're in debt to them, they technically own you. That's what being in debt is all about. That's why they hand out credit cards and all. They want you to live in a system of debt. A debt to a bank which is privately owned. The Federal Reserve, if those of you who are too young to understand this, because they don't teach this stuff in school. They teach you nothing in school. It's the biggest waste of time. That's all it's there for, is to indoctrinate you with lies. The Federal Reserve prints money at its own will. They can print whatever they want. These people can print money out of their rear ends, eat it, and then reprint it. It doesn't matter. It's privately owned. The Federal Reserve. Privately owned. And we take money as a country from the Federal Reserve. They want the entire world to be in debt to the Federal Reserve, in debt to the banksters, to the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds own pretty much all of Israel. It's over 80% of Israel that they own. Syria is an enemy to Israel. And now, with what's going on, with this coincidental launch and attack on the anniversary of the Rothschilds entering America into World War I, Russia is now chirping immediately the next day. So all of these seeds that have been planted with Russia, with people going, oh, well, if Hillary gets elected, then we're going to go to war with Russia. But they want Trump in. They know Trump and Russia will get along because Putin and Trump get along. And now look what happens. Even before it all went down yesterday, Hillary even tweets out that we need to bomb and go after Syria. Trump is one of them. He's been one. And I'm no longer going to be, all right, I won't go too hard on Trump because I don't want people out there to get offended and think I know better than they do. But those of you who have been listening, who have been messaging me saying, God chose Trump, because I heard some channels out there who claim to be truthers, or you heard Alex Jones and all of these frauds out there pushing that Trump was going to stop the New World Order. Well, what are they saying today? Well, they're trying to spin it, right? They're trying to talk about ISIS and this other stuff going, they're trying to link it to other things. They're trying to say, well, there was babies killed, we should have went. This is about Israel. And if they're not talking about Rothschild Israel, then they're not talking truth. And that's a fact, okay? And there's channels I cannot stand on YouTube. Individuals who I hate and hate me. But you know what? At least some of us are smart enough to understand about Israel and Zionism, because that is the root of it. And you know what the problem is? It's harder for me as a Christian to talk about this and get the point across, because Christians are too dumbed down by the belief that Israel is our friend, because they are not interpreting scripture properly. The current state of Israel has been hijacked, okay? Hijacked. It is not the Jews referred to in the Bible who are in Israel. These are the fake Jews spoke about in the book of Revelation. So now with Russia, the headline saying that Putin's very upset. And this is stuff I talked about last night. Remember all the stuff with Trump in the media? The celebrities coming out saying, we warned you, he acts on emotion. He acts on emotion. That's because this was planned out in advance. Oh, he acts on emotion. If something happens, we can end up going to World War III. They were letting you know, because that's how they work. The seeds were planted. Oh, if one little thing happens, Trump's going to nuke them or send a bomb over. Right? And without even an investigation into what happened in Syria, if something even did happen, if it, a hoax, false flag, you can make your own decisions based on the pictures and stuff that are out there. But there wasn't even a proper investigation that even went on just days later, right? So they're going to talk about that in the media. They're going to say there wasn't an investigation and Trump just immediately dropped them out. Oh, this is dangerous. Now Russia wants a piece of, is against America. And wow, what a coincidence that we did this on the anniversary of the day that we entered World War I, knowing how they operate with numerology. So none of this stuff is a coincidence. But who's the beneficiary? Who's always the beneficiary? Israel. Who's the top enemy, or one of the top enemies of Israel? Syria. And who is Trump working for? He's working for the Zionist banksters. He's working for fake Israel, is what we should just call it, because this is not the biblical Israel. If you're out there and you're listening to these channels who are telling you that's fine, because salvation's only found through Christ, okay? If you don't want to get involved in this stuff and know what's really going on, that's not a big deal. Your salvation's dependent on your faith in Jesus Christ. That's what your salvation's dependent on. But don't listen to these channels who are biblical channels, then they try to cross into this stuff, these world conflicts with the New World Order, acting like they understand what's going on. Because they don't understand what's going on. So they're trying to say, listen, there's, I'm a Christian channel, but I'm a Christian truther. So they're doing Bible studies, and then the next day they're talking about Israel in a pro narrative, saying, watch out for these truth channels who are going after Zionism, because they don't get it. They don't have a clue. There's some of them are just, you want to say some of them are shills. Well, of course, there's tons of pro-Israel shills on YouTube. That's the number one sign to tell a shill, is their stance on Zionism and Israel. But then we have Christians who literally are just so dumbed down. So avoid these people, unless you're going there for biblical studies and teachings. But when it comes to the New World Order stuff and all this stuff that's really going on and trying to decipher the fake news from the real news, listen to people who know what they're talking about. Because this, at the end of the day, is this the start of World War III? I don't know. It very well could be. We'll find out, right? In the coming days, coming weeks, coming hours. We don't know. But you think it's a coincidence that this happened on the anniversary of us entering World War I? Knowing that Syria and Israel have always been enemies, that they can't stand each other, that it's Rothschild Israel, and that the Rothschilds were the ones who got us into World War I. And wow, what a coincidence that Syria is independent, that they don't rely on the Federal Reserve. Is that a coincidence? You think that is? That it's a central bank, it's state-owned and controlled? Not owned by the globalist banksters? Of course not. Of course not. And do you think if a chemical attack really did happen, if it did happen, if all that stuff went down and it was a false flag and not a hoax and people really died, regardless of your opinion of hoax or false flag, you don't think Israel was involved? You know why nobody looks to Israel? Because all this stuff I keep saying. They always are the victim. That is why when you talk about it, people oh, stop it. Those poor people. It's the narrative. It's the mainstream. Nobody ever looks there. Everybody's got to support Israel. Israel probably has more military there than we have and more money. You know how much money we dump into Israel? It's a joke that people can't figure this out. It's laughable at this point that Christians are still defending Israel like this is the biblical Israel. Get over it. It's not biblical Israel. This is Rothschild Israel. They own Israel. It is infested with fake Jews. And it's the same thing I keep saying. I point out the Talmud. I point out how we're slaves to them, how they look at us as cattle, how Jesus is rolling around in feces, and Christians still go, oh, I don't know about that. And they teach that in their temple. They teach pedophilia. People out there who are in this movement who only care about the pedophilia aspect, well, guess who teaches it? The same people in Israel who study the Talmud talk about having sex with 3-year-olds. Why do you never hear about it? Take a guess why. Because they're the victim, remember? They're always the victim. The censorship now on YouTube. What do you think it's really about? Why is Alex Jones not getting censored? Because he's not talking about Israel and the Jews. They know that people are catching on. Even little stories. I did a story about tombstones getting, the tombstones were smashed. It's an attack against Jews worldwide. Oh, bomb threats are coming in. No evidence of bomb threats at all. And then when it came to the actual tombs in the graveyard getting demolished, police went and looked at it and the ground caved in. That's why the tombs fell. The media never corrected the story. They never went out there and said, oh, we were wrong. They jumped to conclusions, right? Isn't the media supposed to look into things for evidence? Because it's a pro-Israel. Always make the Jews the victim. And it's not the biblical Jews. These are Khazarian false Jews. They're barbarian. I don't understand how people cannot get this. I pray that people will wake up and see this. But unfortunately, people are getting their information, some of which come from people who are actually living in Zionist families, whether their mother's Jewish or their father's Jewish, and one of them's Christian. This is toxic. It's toxic. So again, for those of you who thought Donald Trump, oh, he's stopping the New World Order, well, he just showed you his allegiance to Israel. He just showed you his allegiance to the Rothschilds and the banksters, because he's always been one of them. He didn't just wake up and get cut a check to do this. He's been one from the beginning, because there is no election. It's a selection. And there's still going to be people out there who support Trump, who still will say, well, wait, I got messages last night from so many people that said, no, don't start saying this now because, other people did this, not him. I mean, give me a break. His whole cabinet is filled with Zionists. Enough is enough. Christians need to wake up to it. Okay? You need to wake up to what's going on. Is this the beginning of World War III? We'll find out. Russia's going to be involved now. We'll see some false flags probably because the seeds have been planted for quite some time. This right here is not a coincidence. Match up the dates with the Rothschilds. Understand how Satanists and numerology and these Jews work and their obsession with numerology, the Masons' obsessions with numerology. This better be a wake-up call to those of you who have been pro, Donald Trump, but aware of the Illuminati, the New World Order, Zionism, all this stuff, Jesuits, all of it, Vatican. This better be a wake-up call, because if it's not, then you're never going to wake up and see the actual truth. I thank you guys for listening to today's show. God bless all of you and your families.